So this is my video about my experience so far observing an ESL classroom. The school where I am assisting is Beacon Heights Elementary here in Salt Lake City, and I assist Mrs. Gifford with her ELD students, as they're called at Beacon Heights. It stands for English Language Development. There aren't that many ELD students in some classes. It depends from which class it is. Typically, the higher grade students, there aren't as many of them that need to be in ELD classrooms, possibly because they've had more time to develop their language skills. But we do have all sorts of students from a variety of grades, and Mrs. Gifford assists in teaching them the English language. And so there are all kinds of different levels. Some of them are emergent, and some of them are more intermediate, and some of them are very close to native. The school has a very open feel. It's very friendly, and I think it's a really great place for kids. I actually have my little brother who goes there, so I actually had some experience with the school already, which is why I decided that I wanted to ask them if I could work there. And we've loved it. He says he likes it there a lot. It's a very nice school, and a lot of the kids are from a lot of different countries all over the world. Many of their families actually are students at the University of Utah, as it turns out. And they come from all over the world, and some of them are some from Japan, some from India, some from Korea, and a lot of different South American countries. I mean, there's just a variety. So the way that they are learning to speak English and their unique trials that they face vary widely based on where they're coming from, but the classroom itself, I think, accommodates a lot of them, and it's very interactive, and I see a lot of production from nearly all of them. Due to it being a somewhat smaller school, there aren't very many students, and when they do leave their classrooms to join the ELD class, as they have to at certain points in the day, it's a little bit of a problem for the other teachers because it's a bit disruptive for their learning. They have to go back and reteach them what the other students would be learning during that time. So that has been a bit of a problem. Mrs. Gifford is only a part-time teacher, so she's not there all day, and so classes aren't available throughout the day. But there's time enough, I think, for all of the students that need to be taught. The classroom is very interactive, I would say. It's very colorful and bright, and there's a lot of different fun interactive elements for children, and there's bean bags and rugs and a lot of things that are typical of an elementary school classroom, but a lot of the activities involve writing on a whiteboard or drawing something, but they're mainly oral and interactive. Sometimes the students will go and often get into partners and do things as partners or in groups. Sometimes they'll play games. The students are very motivated by games because Mrs. Gifford told me that she was having a hard time keeping them motivated and focused because her classroom is separate from all the other classrooms, so they don't feel like they have any consequences for what they do because it's not connected to the rest of their class. So in order to keep them motivated to learn and keep focused on their activities, she rewards them with games at the end of the week if they have completed all their tasks. If they haven't, they have to finish anything that they haven't yet completed. Mrs. Gifford herself is a good teacher, I think. She's kind, and she is definitely very aware of what students are doing and if they are or are not paying attention. But she definitely keeps them in line. She doesn't like them to goof off very much. She won't permit them to do, certain things if they're not doing them exactly as she says. But she, by and large, will try and get most people to engage in the activity at hand. but if they do it incorrectly, she may not necessarily correct them. As long as they're engaged and paying attention to what she's doing, that seems to be her goal. I'm now going to move on to errors in phonology that I have heard around the classroom. The first error in phonology is an error a Japanese student made when saying the word lemonade. When saying this word, the Japanese student pronounced it lemonade. It was by and large similar to how we would pronounce lemonade. However, it was using, instead of the English L, it was using the Japanese RL sound, which is not correct for English. The IPA transcription of this word would be in the way that he pronounced it, and the way that it is pronounced in English would be. It would be similar to this. The top version is what the student said, and the bottom version is the proper transcription of how we pronounce it in English. The second error in phonology was made by an Indian student whose native language is Hindi, and he made an error in pronouncing the word thing. Now, the way that he pronounced thing was more similar to thing, which may have been just because he was a child, I'm not sure, but it was, so it's clearly a difference between the F sound and the TH thing, the voiceless African. So here is the IPA transcription, that's better, the IPA transcription of how he pronounced it and then how it is actually pronounced. By and large, I do not see Mrs. Gifford correct errors in phonology. When she hears it repeatedly, I have seen her do it once or twice. However, I think that she is more pleased if a lot of production is happening with the student, even if the production isn't necessarily completely correct. All of the errors that I have heard students make haven't prevented them from still being understandable to the native English speaker, which is probably another factor as to why Mrs. Gifford did not take any measures to correct them. Next, we're going to talk about morphology errors. The first error we're going to discuss was made by a native speaker of Japanese. He said, "This one doesn't works," when referring to I believe it was a dry erase marker, which he was showing to Mrs. Gifford. And this is how it would be written if we were to write what he said. And his main error was putting an S on the end of work, as you can see. He I think got confused because in positive form this would have been "this one works," but because it was negative, it should have been "this one doesn't work." The second error I'm going to discuss was made by a student who I believe to be a native speaker of Korean. The sentence in question was "have to say where it have to go." It would have been written like this. Now, there's a few errors in this sentence, such as the fact that there is no subject. I believe that that the student was trying to use it as an imperative sentence to instruct another student as to the activity that they were doing. But what I'm talking about is when it says "where it have to go." In correct English, this would have been "where it has to go," which I think the student got a little bit confused on the morphology of that word. My cooperating teacher, Mrs. Gifford, has not really provided very much correction when it comes to students' misuses of morphology. She hasn't told me exactly why this is, but I think that it's because she's more focused on the fact that they are attempting to communicate and, for the most part, are communicating in an effective manner, but um, she hasn't gotten down to talking about little details here and there. I think that she's focused more on the bigger picture. Next, we're going to talk about errors in semantics. One of the first errors in semantics that I saw was made by a student who, when Mrs. Gifford said, "Do you have any questions?" said yes. Now, when Mrs. Gifford said, "What are your questions?" the student then responded with no. I believe that this shows that the that the student himself did not fully understand what Mrs. Giffords was saying, and when further prompted for questions, perhaps realized what she had been saying, or perhaps just said no in an attempt to not have to speak anymore. This was one of the students whose comprehension levels is perhaps lower than some of the others. Another error in semantics was made by a Japanese student who asked Mrs. Giffords, "How do you talk this?" Now, I believe that the student meant to say, "How do you say this?" Or at least that was the meaning that they were trying to convey. But we have a lot of different words for talk or speak or say in the English language, and I believe that was what confused the student. I have yet to see Mrs. Gifford make any corrections as to semantics. I believe, again, that this is because she's more focused on moving on to the next activity and making sure that students are having a lot of production, regardless of whether it's completely correct or not. This concludes my video.